DarKoaster is a new for 2023 Intamin Straddle coaster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. This is an indoor coaster placed in the show building once home to the Curse of DarKastle dark ride, and this coaster continues the mythology of that attraction. Is this a worthwhile successor, or was the former dark ride better? Find out in this review of DarKoaster. Curse of DarKastle opened in 2005. This was a highly impressive dark ride for a regional theme park. Built by Oceaneering, this attraction used the same ride system as the highly popular Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man at Islands of Adventure. DarKastle featured a dynamic ride vehicle that could spin and tilt as it progressed through a series of 3D screens. The ride was themed to a corrupt ruler named King Ludwig. He killed his parents, and when his advisors tried to overthrow him, he threw a wild winter festival and they were never seen again. Guests who wanted a ride entered a haunted Bavarian castle, frozen in time. I rode this attraction several times over the years. While the story was a tad hard to follow for first-timers, it grew on me with each ride, especially as I did some research on the backstory. The 3D scenes and jump scares were fantastic, and the ride complemented Busch Gardens' deep lineup of roller coasters. It was a wonderful change of pace, and it was also a trustworthy option during inclement weather. DarKastle closed in September 2017. This was believed to be temporary. The ride building was repurposed for a Halloween haunt named Frostbite. Then it was used for some Christmas activities as well. Then in January 2018, Busch Gardens announced DarKastle would never reopen. The park cited high maintenance and operational costs relative to rider demand. It was very unfortunate to lose a ride as unique as this. Over the next few years, this beautiful castle sat mostly abandoned. It would only open for a few special events, such as additional Halloween haunts. In 2021, I experienced the Nevermore haunt inside the building. It was refreshing to get back in there, but I couldn't help but think the large and ornate space was being wasted on something other than a themed ride. SeaWorld as a whole has not invested heavily in dark rides. In fact, they've spent more time closing them. A similar fate happened at Battle of Air at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, Antarctica Empire of the Penguins SeaWorld Orlando, the Wild Arctic motion simulators at a few SeaWorld parks, and the Submarine Quest ride at SeaWorld San Diego. Recently, SeaWorld has been investing mightily in coasters. Busch Gardens Williamsburg just recently got Pantheon, an extreme Intamin multi-launch coaster for the 2022 season. They've also been backfilling those aforementioned removed dark rides with new coaster experiences. For 2024, SeaWorld Orlando announced Penguin Trek, a multi-launch B&M family coaster that would replace Antarctica. For 2023, SeaWorld added a pair of Intamin Straddle coasters. SeaWorld San Diego added Arctic Rescue to replace Wild Arctic. And for the sake of this video, Busch Gardens Williamsburg received DarKoaster. This was placed in the pre-existing show building that once held DarKastle. DarKoaster's conception is heavily linked to Pantheon and the rumored Dragonspire project. Per BGW fans, about a decade ago, Busch Gardens started planning a massive giga-coaster with Intamin that would cross over the park's Rhine River. Eventually, these plans were modified. The project was split into two coasters, one that would become Pantheon, and another that would be dubbed Dragonspire. The latter would have been placed in the plot once held by Dragonfire, hence the project name. This would have been a shuttle coaster with multiple launches and a massive 355-foot or 108-meter tall twisted spike. Post-pandemic, Dragonspire has reportedly been put on hold. Meanwhile, the park fast-tracked a different project with Intamin and DarKoaster, and to be honest, I think this was a much bigger need for this Virginia theme park. A few years ago, Busch Gardens Williamsburg started offering year-round operations. This was despite the park no longer having any indoor rides. If you've ever visited the park's Christmastown event, which is awesome by the way, you know weather can throw a major monkey wrench into your daily plans. The park's outdoor coasters typically close when temperatures drop below 40 degrees, and this happens quite frequently in the winter months. The park desperately needed a signature ride that could remain open during inclement weather. This would also help the park in summer months when a passing thunderstorm rolls through. Busch Gardens also needed another family coaster to suck up demand. Outside of Pantheon, the coasters with the longest waits are typically those more geared towards families like Invader and Verbolten. DarKoaster is located in the Oktoberfest section of the park. This is towards the back corner of the park. For years, this area would typically have a staggered opening. One auxiliary benefit with the addition of DarKoaster that this area is typically available right at park open now, at least in 2023. I would not be surprised if the park has this area open late again in future years once DarKoaster's newness wears off. Having a ride in the giant castle once again does wonders for the Oktoberfest area. It brings so much more energy to that back corner of the park. The large gray medieval castle looks fantastic, and has an aura of mystery. I also like this ride's menacing entry sign. The ride's story is that guests enter a castle haunted by King Ludwig. Sound familiar? The queue is very atmospheric as you pass through the different rooms of the castle, but there's a terrible winter storm outside, hence why you pass all sorts of ski equipment through the indoor queue. Eventually, you find snowmobiles that take you out of the castle into the storm, where you find Ludwig has become some sort of supernatural force. I thought it was a clever way to incorporate bits from the old Dark ride, while also turning it into an all-new theme. My one critique with the theme is that it's quite ominous and foreboding. I enjoy that personally, but the dark thematic material may scare younger kids, which is a bummer because the ride itself is best suited as a family coaster. It's a good thing there's a lot to see in the indoor queue because this ride's awful capacity. Straddle coasters as a whole do not typically have the best throughputs, but DarKoaster especially. You have just 2 trains, but worst of all, they hold just 10 riders each. Yup, that's it. You have just 5 rows of 2. The ride has a theoretical capacity of just 350 riders. That is disturbingly low for a park as large as Busch Gardens Williamsburg. As a result, this line absolutely crawls. No matter what day you visit, expect DarKoaster to have a lengthy wait. The line has routinely been posted at 1 to 2 hours all year since it opened. Adding insult to injury, DarKoaster has been extremely temperamental this year. It has frequently had downtime. Intamin straddle coasters as a whole have decent reliability, so you have to ask what's different about this one, and I think the likely culprit is that unique switch track that sends you around the layout twice, so hopefully this can become less of an issue in future years. Another annoying thing is that Busch Gardens does not list DarKoaster's wait time in the park app. It's fair to assume the line is almost always long, but it's frustrating that you cannot find out if the ride is even open without walking all the way over there. I really hope this is added to the app in the future. So how can you beat the crowds? There are a few ways to do so. First, take advantage of membership early ride access if you can. On days that this has been offered, DarKoaster has typically been just a 5 to 10 minute wait. This is the most efficient way to get multiple laps in this coaster. Second, head to DarKoaster immediately after the park opens. It is quite a hike because it is located in the back of the park, but you should have a minimal wait if you were there for rope drop and hustle your way back there. Third, save DarKoaster for the end of the night. After having a posted 60 to 90 minute wait all day long, DarKoaster was just a 5 minute wait right before close for me. There are 2 cons with this approach though. First, you potentially sacrifice a night ride in the outdoor coasters, and there are a lot of great night rides at this park. Second, if you save your first ride until the end of the day, you risk the ride going down for maintenance issues, causing you to not even get on it. The fourth way to avoid a line is to use the park's quick queue skip the line pass. This is an extremely pricey upcharge though. Now DarKoaster is only available in the highest tier as a one-time skip. It will allow you to bypass the entire queue though, taking you right up to the load platform. There, you are free to select any row you'd like. I tried DarKoaster a few times in both the front and back row. Both have their advantages. The front is the better sense of speed, but the back allows you to fully appreciate the special effects. Many of them trigger when the front of the train is passing through them, so you have an extra second to see them in the rear rows. As noted earlier, the vehicles are supposed to be snowmobiles, but they look pretty similar to the jet ski trains and some other straddle coasters, and they feel identical too, which is a good thing. They're easy to board. Then you have just a lap bar, which is much more minimalistic than the moto coasters offered by other manufacturers. You then get that motorcycle effect by leaning forwards and grasping the handlebars. Once checked, the ride begins with a slow left-hand turn out of the station. You go into a tunnel, and immediately after, you hit the ride's first launch. This is a tire-driven launch like most of the other straddle coasters, and it has an okay kick to it. If you're holding onto those handlebars, you'll feel the acceleration trying to pull you backwards. The launch goes through some archways, enhancing the sense of speed. At the end of it, you see a lightning strike on the wall in front of you. Then you have a 180-degree turnaround. The rise upwards has a bit of positive G's. Then you have this S hump downwards. No airtime, but you pass under an illuminated archway. You then have a 180-degree left-hand turn that has some positive G's to it. This leads directly into Launch 2. This one is much peppier than the first. It has good punch to it, and you really feel the force trying to peel you back. And as you accelerate, you pass these hanging apparitions. You then have the same elements that started the first half, just mirrored. This time you have 180-degree turnaround right, followed by another S-dip. The turnaround this time is noticeably better, as it has very good laterals going into it. Then the S-dip comes close to giving airtime. This element also passes a series of illuminated skeletons that get really close to the track. This was one of my favorite effects on the ride. You then have back-to-back low turns, one right and one left. These turns have a nice sense of speed and a bit of force to them, but they also have a light shake to them. This caught me off guard because the rest of the coaster is extremely smooth. It's not a deal breaker, just odd for a model that's usually glossy smooth. You then hit the brakes and pass under an archway, and you'll see King Ludwig's ghost coming towards you on a screen overhead. But instead of returning to the station, you turn left on the special bypass track. This allows you to complete the course a second time. This is a brilliant way to give a second lap while also allowing multi-train operations. The bypass is right next to the station, but it's nicely themed with some illuminated windows. Then at the end, you will see another lightning strike on the wall. You then turn left onto the original launch and repeat the layout a second time. While the forces are identical, the effects do change somewhat. The initial S-dip passes some ghosts this time. Launch 2 is a series of lightning bolts on both sides of the train. You unfortunately don't pass the skeletons this time around, but you do have a cooler ending. As you hit the brakes, King Ludwig appears to eat the train. It's a neat effect as his face seems to stretch beyond the screen onto the archway, especially because it's accompanied by an abundance of fog. You then return to the station, ending the experience. And I have to give Intamin a lot of credit for finding a way to pack so much ride into an existing structure. While DarKoaster had a big show building for a dark ride, it's not all that big compared to other indoor coasters. The physical track is roughly 1,200 feet, or 366 meters in length, but because of that bypass track, you experience roughly double the amount of track in a single ride, which gives the ride a much more respectable duration. And the ride has solid pacing too. The ride maintains its speed well thanks to the 4 launches and quick turns, and the darkened environment and theming enhance that overall sense of speed. Now, what about the theming? I had heard many people call DarKoaster disappointing in this area, but I was relatively impressed. The pre-boarding experience is great between the castle and detailed queue line. Then the ride portion had more effects than I was anticipating. Some turns were dark, but roughly half the elements had something to look at, whether it be a ghost or some weather effect. I also love how cold the building is. That was one of the most famous aspects about DarKastle. While it's not as cold as the former dark ride, the temperature very noticeably drops during the main layout. This feels so nice on a hot summer day, and it helps sell the idea you're supposed to be in a snowstorm. And that's important because the other visuals don't really convey that. It feels more like you're in a haunted graveyard between the spirits and lightning effects. Don't get me wrong, I think the aesthetic looks good. It's just a bit different than what the park promised. It is also worth knowing you can see many of the upcoming elements. While the building is fairly dark, it is not pitch black. This is because of the special effects, but the sensory deprivation does boost the overall sense of speed at least. Lastly, I also want to give recognition to this ride's nice soundtrack. During the main coaster bit, you have this ominous soundtrack playing throughout the building. It definitely adds a sense of danger. So, what would I rate DarKoaster? I would give this coaster a 7 out of 10. This coaster does a lot of things well. I like how the ride continues the lore of DarKastle, and the visuals during the pre-boarding experience are wonderful. Then the main layout does a good job mixing darkness and effects. There was a solid mix of physical props and some screen-based effects as well. I also think the coaster itself had nice pacing between the 2 launches, well technically 4 launches, quick turns, and dark environment. The layout does feel a bit constrained, and it is a bit repetitive though, not just because you repeat the layout twice, but the 2 halves of the layout feel nearly identical. Still, It's a much welcome indoor coaster for this park. I think it compares quite favorably to the other Straddle coasters. While I do prefer some of the more extreme ones, DarKoaster's setting allows it to stand out from the rest. But is DarKoaster better than DarKastle? Not quite. I think the storytelling of the original was superior, but if SeaWorld won't build a dark ride, a themed indoor coaster is a nice consolation prize, and it is an above average enclosed coaster for sure. It's just a bummer the ride's capacity is so bad, but if you can get on this with a manageable weight, it is a genuinely fun attraction that's well worth experiencing. So those are my thoughts on DarKoaster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. What are your thoughts on this Intamin Straddle coaster? Do you prefer it to the old dark ride? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I would appreciate it if you gave this video a like, and you consider subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.